Let me tell you a story. Several years ago, some friends of mine and I went on a sea kayaking trip to Alaska. It was absolutely gorgeous, and about midway through the trip, we went on this incredible hike that the guide had shared with us, saying that she had seen this beautiful waterfall that was hidden in the rainforest. So 4 of us decided to go on this hike together. It was the guide, my friend Matt, myself, and another gentleman from the trip. And about midway through the hike, we came out onto this beautiful outcropping that looked out over a gorgeous valley. But sadly for us, the path continued up the side of a mountain that had a sheer rock wall on the right, very narrow path, and a drop of anywhere from 65 to about 150 feet by the time we turned the corner. Now, I'm not afraid of heights, and I was fine with this, in theory. We started walking down this path, and all I could do, because the path was so narrow, is just watch my friend Matt's feet shuffling in front of me. As we were walking along, just like in a cartoon, I saw the dirt go out from underneath Matt's feet. His feet went whoa, 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 whoa. I grabbed a root along the rock wall. I put my arm out. Matt grabbed my arm with both hands, and I swung him, Xena-like. Just saying. To the gentleman behind me, and the gentleman behind me was fortunately paying attention and slammed Matt right up against the face of the wall, like this. So we stood there for a minute, took a breath, and as I make my living with words, I was the first to speak. I looked at the gaping hole, and I looked at my friend Matt, and I said, "Ah!" Matt, who's still pressed up against the rock wall, looked at me and went, "Ah!" I looked at the gentleman behind him and I said, "Hutta, hutta, hutta," and off we went, tropping back down the pathway to go back to camp. Now, as you can imagine, if any of you have ever been through this moment before, you know exactly what happened to me about 50 yards down the path, right? The adrenaline left my body, my knees started to go, I started to cry, I felt sick. And the thing that was fascinating to me about this story is that by the time I got back to camp, I realized that I really didn't remember any of it happening. In my own mind's eye, the only thing I really remember myself is I can see Matt's hands on my arm. That adrenaline hit was so huge that I was acting purely from instinct. Now, it's a good thing it was instinct, and I know it was instinct, because had I had a conscious thought at all, I would have looked at Matt, 180 pounds, me, upper body strength of a 7-year-old. "Bye, I'm sorry, I'll call home for you." Now, some people would say that that mountaintop moment was a courageous act. But really, for me, it wasn't. It was just a really great cocktail of adrenaline and instinct. And when you think about it, that's really what most of us are taught courage is. We're taught that courage is that big, heroic, death-defying, life-threatening act executed by only the chosen few. And that is actually reinforced constantly with a barrage of headlines and images that courage is just something that's unattainable and beyond us. But is that really what courage is? Is it really only those big, heroic actions? And that question is really what started me on an accidental research project on courage. As a recovering corporate executive turned leadership consultant, I was shocked at just how many times inside of teams and organizations, I heard people talking about lacking the courage to change direction on a project, or to even do something as simple as pitching a new innovative idea or process, or raising your hand in a meeting and discussing a dissenting opinion. I was floored that I was seeing teams and actually entire companies being held back by individuals that look just like us, being unable to get past their fear to quickly make decisions. And it got me wondering, what if we didn't have to wait for that crisis to act courageously? What if we made courage a conscious choice? And that is really what's propelled me over the past 2 decades, is to better understand what courage looks like, feels like, and frankly, how do we get more of it? Well, over 8,000 interviews, and 2 decades later, when I started interviewing folks, it was friends and colleagues, and then the poor suffering souls sitting next to me on airplanes, then larger and larger groups of people within our own client organizations, to try and understand what was getting in our way, and how do we find a way to consciously build courage. Now, I know for me, the most surprising thing and frankly shocking thing that we learned is that only 1 in 3 of us believe we're courageous. That blew my mind. Because think about it. At a time in our world where the decisions are bigger, the information is overwhelming, and we're being asked to make tough decisions in shorter and shorter time frames, only 1 in 3 of us are showing up believing we can take courageous action. When the problems facing our society and our planet are complex and difficult and frightening, only 1 of us in 3 believe we can actually courageously take action. Now, that statistic isn't that surprising when you think about how all of us react in the moment, when we have that little moment of anxiety or fear that holds us back. We hesitate or we stop before taking action. It's that one little moment that we have a choice in how we act or don't act. And I know for me in that moment, you have those voices in your head. Do you have those too? Many, many voices. You're not smart enough, strong enough, young enough, old enough, strong enough. I call those little voices the courage stranglers. Now, it's a pretty graphic description, isn't it? But in my mind, a courage strangler literally chokes our ability to act courageously. And these are the myths and beliefs that we hold about both ourselves and about courage. The first strangler that we identified is the myth that courage is big. It's that big, heroic act, the death-defying, life-threatening act. But what our research has shown is actually most of us believe courage are those smaller, everyday actions that we all take. And this is particularly true when you're talking about someone else and the courage that they have had to do everyday, simple acts of courage. I'll just show you how universal this idea is. How many of you, either personally or professionally, in the last year have said to yourself, I wish I had the courage to? Raise your hands. It's almost all of us. That's how universal that courage strangler is. Second courage strangler that we identified is if you are courageous, you have no fear. That's absolutely not true. If you're not scared, you're simply not paying attention. Courage is not about being fearless. Rather, it's the ability to feel that fear and not allow it to paralyze you. Courage is never about being fearless. As a matter of fact, for most of us, that little rush of anxiety, that little bit of fear might actually give us that adrenaline hit to take the action that we were fearful of. So courage is not just about being fearless, but not allowing that fear to paralyze you. And the third courage strangler we discovered is that you either have or don't have courage. People are just born with it. It's not true. What our research has shown us is that 100% of us are courageous. And even more importantly, courage can be learned and it can be strengthened. The best analogy I have for this is courage is just like any other muscle. If you choose to target it and exercise it, it will get stronger. And I'll prove this to you right now. How many of you can think back to a time when you had that moment of fear, but you took action in spite of it. It might be something silly, like you're on the beach in Mexico, had maybe one too many margaritas, and you thought parasailing was a great idea. Good, I'm not alone in that, obviously. Perfect. Or it might be something more serious, where you decide that you want to do a TEDx. I don't know what I was thinking. You want to do a TEDx, but maybe you're not that comfortable on stage. Whatever that example is, I want you to think back to how you felt right after. And my bet is most of you, if it was something big, you felt amazing, like you could conquer the world. Maybe if it was something smaller, you might have just had that wonderful, quiet moment of pride, feeling good about what you'd done. That's the perfect example of the power of targeting that muscle and lifting that weight, because it does allow you to strengthen your ability to be courageous. So, as we were thinking about this and trying to understand it, we spent a great deal of time talking to people about not only what held them back, but more importantly, how they kind of tricked themselves into taking the courageous action regardless. And what we discovered is, just like fear, courage can be contagious. And you've all seen it. It's the first person who stands up at the standing ovation, and everybody follows. It's the first person on the dance floor. If we all exercise our courage muscle, it will not just enable us, but it will enable all of those around us. So, as we looked at how you build your courage, we discovered that there's 3 really simple but powerful things that you can do, personally and professionally, to help build your courage. The first is recognize the opportunity. Every single time you have that little fission of fear, a little bit of anxiety, that's your moment to lift the weight and exercise your courage muscle. The second is get comfortable with the discomfort. It's not going to feel fun. I can tell you that right now. Get comfortable with the discomfort. I mean, building your courage muscle is just like learning a new language. Nobody would expect you to be fluent without a whole lot of mistakes, a whole lot of conscious practice, feeling kind of silly, and most importantly, being able to give yourself that pep talk in order to keep going. Third thing is ask, what's the best thing that could happen? Now, remember earlier when I asked you, how many of you have thought to yourself, personally or professionally, I wish I had the courage to? I want you to take a moment and think about that situation you were pondering. And rather than asking, what's the worst thing that can happen if I do this? What if you asked yourself, what's the best thing that could happen if I did this? It changes the whole discussion, doesn't it? It actually changes your perspective. So why does any of this matter? What does it matter that we know about the courage stranglers or what we know about courage? Well, imagine if instead of 1 in 3 of us believing that we could make a difference, what if 100% of us believed that we could take courageous action? And it matters because in a world where our problems are so complex and big and frightening, I know it's so easy for all of us to say, well, what difference can I make about climate change or an election or the atrocities happening in other countries? But the reality is, what our research has shown is that if we practice our courage, if we start lifting heavier and heavier weights with that muscle, it will enable 100% of us to start tackling those problems. And that's what those problems need, especially right now. There's a wonderful quote by Nin that says, life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage. I want you to think about what we could do in our homes, in our families, in our teams, in our companies, in our countries, and in our world, if 100% of us consciously made the choice to build our courage. Thank you.